You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 338. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today we are talking about leadership. Leadership in the corporate world, leadership in our government, and why we need new leaders. Charlotte Otter is joining me, and her new book, We Need New Leaders, is out now. We're talking about reputation, communication, and all of the things in between, along with Charlotte's personal journey and story as to how she got here. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi, Michelle. Lovely to see you.
So good to see you too. And you have already said you're coming to us from Oslo today.
I am. I feel very privileged to be here. It's such a beautiful city.
Amazing. I've never been. So another one to add to the list.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you take a moment to introduce yourself to everyone, please?
Yes, I'd love to. So my name is Charlotte Otter. I am an author, an advisor, a podcaster. I've spent most of my career in communications in different forms, in journalism and PR, and in executive communications. And I've recently written a book called We Need New Leaders, which is about the intersection of reputation, leadership, and diversity.
And I love it. I devoured it. And I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. We need new leaders, whether as an American, we're talking about our government leadership, in our corporations, we need new leadership. And with what we have going on over here with removing DEI, that's a big part of your book. Why is it important to have diverse leaders?
Well, the research has clearly shown that the more diverse voices you have around the table, the more innovative companies are. I mean, that is not a point we argue anymore. There's been years of research. But I also think it's really important for representation, so for emerging leaders to see that the possibility of them becoming a leader exists. And then some of the things that I'm discovering as I talk to leaders from diverse backgrounds about their reputation is that having a great reputation is a form of power. So it's not only representation, it's building a bridge that others can cross. And I really love that.
I love that too. And I mean, I know this and I understand it and I obviously embrace it. But why do you think there is such hesitation in regards to bringing diversity into bringing that experience to the table, that we actually have to have this conversation on why it's important?
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous in 2025 that we have to have this conversation. It should be a given to all. And to many companies and corporations, it is a given. I think what's happened is that we've had a backlash. I think that people felt uncomfortable and silenced by what DEI looked like for a while. And what I'm starting to learn is that by siloing diversity, equity, and inclusion off into its own department, that never really gave it the chance to thread itself through the culture of organizations, through every team, through every initiative, every leader learning how to become inclusive. So it was so much easier to just chop it off. For the companies for whom their DEI was always performative, by having it in a silo, it was very simple to just make that cut. But I think for companies where it still resonates with their values, even if they're changing the language. I mean, I've heard companies talk about people positive experiences. You know, you don't have to call it DEI, but you can still adhere to the values. And there are companies that are still doing that, which is wonderful to see.
And do you think I'm very much of the opinion, I think that when we call something out or say that we are this way, or if a company says, "Oh, we embrace DEI," that you probably aren't so much if you have to call it out. So
Yes.
those who are changing the name or whatnot and not being performative, that this is just who we are. I think it's very easy for us to look at a company and see that from the get-go. Same thing. I've seen podcasts who, oh, how diverse are my guests? I'm like, well, do you really have to ask yourself?
Yeah.
If you have to
Yeah.
ask yourself, then the answer is probably you need to work on it.
Yes, absolutely. And I say something similar to leaders. If you're ever saying, I'm so humbled to receive this, award, you're probably not humble. Like if you're saying the word
Yes.
out loud, let other people say you're humble, but don't be the person who says you're humble.
Yes.
So
It's
you've got to be
it's like
careful about
authentic.
the language.
I
Yes,
hate that
yes.
word. Don't say you're authentic.
Yeah, it's so, I'm so interested in this idea of authenticity because it was quite a shock to me when I left corporate and was starting to build my advisory. I spoke to a very young LinkedIn influencer, and he was probably about 23 or 24. And I said, my ambition and my mission is to help leaders communicate in a way that's authentic to them. And he said, oh, I never say authentic, just say be real. And that was the first time I realized, oh, this is a concept that's contested. I didn't know authenticity was contested. So it's been very interesting me to hear, it's interesting for me to hear what you say, interesting to hear what others say. And, let's face it, the President of the United States is authentic.
Oh, he is.
Just authentically not so great, but still authentic. So it's something that I haven't really cleared up for myself, what authentic really means. But I put it out on LinkedIn a few weeks or months ago, and people came back to me and said, authenticity is about behaving according to your values. And I do like that because that
Mm-hmm.
to me is very similar to reputation.
I love that. And let's talk about reputation too, because in the book, you talk about being proactive versus reactive, and how leaders need to really get a handle on this. But not just leaders, like people even in the workplace who have this ability. And I loved the communications term. What was the chief communications officer? That's what you referred to help these leaders. And I thought, oh, it's kind of like what I do. And I loved being able to put that label to it. So can you talk a bit about how leaders can and should be proactive when it comes to their reputation management?
Yeah, sure. And there are two great metaphors that come up when I talk about reputation. So the one came from a CEO who I interviewed for the thesis that then became the book. And he said he's now in his second CEO role. He says he spends between 5 and 6 hours a week building his reputation proactively on social media. And when I said why, he said it's vitamins instead of aspirin. By proactively working on his reputation, using the platforms that are available to us, which is the social media platforms, he's creating that immune system. He's building an immune system of trust so that if and when there's a crisis, and there usually is, at some point there's a crisis, his audiences, all his different stakeholders, are much more likely to trust him and believe him when he says, hey guys, this thing went wrong and I'm really sorry and this is what we're doing to fix it. So just stepping up when there's a crisis, having not worked on your reputation, that's taking aspirin. That's taking something in the moment to reactively to fix the problem. The other metaphor that came up for me that is brilliant comes from the book called The Narrative Age by Frank Wolf, who's the co-founder of Staffbase, which is a comms tech unicorn based in Germany. And Frank talks about the narrative moat, which also has a protective sense. And he talks about it in terms of companies. So he says, stories build narratives and narratives build reputations. And the stronger the narratives you have around you, the more you have that protective moat so that if and when things do go wrong, you have that kind of buffer. And in the book, I've taken both those metaphors and applied it to individuals. And it's super important for CEOs. It's important for the C-suite. but it's also important for emerging leaders who have ambition. And in fact, actually, it's important for all of us because we can't predict the job market now, and I personally totally ignored my own reputation when I was working as an head of executive comms at a big global corporate, looking after everybody else's reputations. I ignored my own. And since leaving corporate, I've spent the last 3 years building it up, and it's hard work. So I think it's the onus is on all of us to be caretakers of our own reputations, and if we leave it alone, your reputation exists anyway.
Yes.
So you might as well try and influence it. You can't control it, but you can influence it.
Yes, it goes back to building your personal brand, I think, too. And that's
Yes.
something that is a newer phrase per se, especially in the corporate world. And having been laid off twice, and I had spent 18 years, in an industry in which I built up these brands and didn't build up myself. Luckily, my reputation per se preceded who I was, that, there was a consistency in that. But it goes right along with, we have to be able to work on ourselves, get ourselves out there as people, and to work on that personal brand as well, of this is what we are experts on and what we can do. And it's not just the companies we represent.
Absolutely. And I think that's what corporate folks do all the time, is their, for example, their LinkedIn presence is 100% about the brand that they work for. And it's missing the human element, the stories, the expertise, the experience, the 5 things I did wrong. And the leaders who I work with, who are sometimes shy about what they call self-promotion, I say to them, but if you share your experience, it's more than self-promotion. You're educating and helping others, and you're building a community. And that helps people who have a sense of discomfort around the idea of a personal brand. It helps them get around it.
Yes, I run into this with a lot of clients, of that discomfort of, I don't want to promote myself, and yes, I want to do podcast interviews, but then how do I promote them without saying, look at me, look at me? And that's exactly what I tell clients, is look at it as a way to help others, because you're sharing your story, your expertise. You're not self-promoting per se. And I think that aligns quite well with what you say in the book.
Yeah, for sure. So there's another idea around reputation that I use quite a lot in the book, and that I think is really useful for folks. So Rupert Younger, who's the head of the Oxford University Centre for Reputation, in his book, The Reputation Game, broke reputation down into 3 parts. So narratives, behaviors, and networks. And the narratives is where personal brand comes into play. So what are the stories that you tell about yourself? What are the experiences of your life that you like to show? But reputation goes deeper than that, because the next aspect, behaviors are quite hard to control or manage. They're quite instinctive. But a reputation fails when stories and behaviors don't match. And we see that all the time with CEOs or with companies. Oh, our values are, for example, diversity, like we were saying at the top of the interview. And then the next day they chop away their diversity team. That's reputational as far as I'm concerned. And then the third aspect, networks, is where you're showing up, where you're being seen, both personally, but also online and on social media. And the network part of it is the network effect, is what other people are saying about you when you're not in the room, which is the uncontrollable part of reputation.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Because there's always that meme or that quote that says you want the friend who will mention your name when you're not in the room, and for it to be, in a good way. And that applies whether it's friendship or corporations and leadership and all of that. It's all intertwined.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you think that leaders can and should be using social media to their benefit? And is there a personal side versus what they're doing under the corporate umbrella? Should they keep it separate? How can they manage both in a way that makes it okay, makes it good, blends all of this leadership, communication, reputation together?
Yeah, interestingly, I was speaking to a client this week, and they said LinkedIn is one of our best internal communication tools. So your employees are following you on LinkedIn, and they're watching very, very carefully with what you do. And if you just repost brand content or show up 4 times a year to talk about, company results, it's a missed opportunity to communicate not only with your employees internally, but all your other important audiences and stakeholders. So some leaders, like for example, the CEO who does 5 to 6 hours of social media a week, I mean, he doesn't need any help. He's totally comfortable and knows how to do it. But for those who are uncomfortable, I say find your allies, find your supporters. So that's why I talk about the chief communications officer or the head of comms. They are entirely responsible for the reputation of the business. So if you are, say, a C-suite or one level below leader, you want to work on your reputation, go and talk to the head of comms. They're looking for people who'll talk to the media, people who'll go on keynote stages, people who'll author blogs and thought leadership. They're looking for people who are active and interested and want to be spokespeople for the company. If the head of comms is too busy to help you and you have a bit of budget, I've seen a lot of executives hire their own executive communications person into their own team. The only caveat there, what I've also seen is leaders who don't actually meet with their executive communicator. So they filter everything through their chief of staff, which is a pointless exercise. So if you've got enough budget to hire your own executive communicator, make sure you spend some time with that person so that they can learn your voice. You can work with a reputation coach. You can work with, a freelancer, somebody external who can help you work out what your stories are, work out ways to show up that feel comfortable or authentic to you, and find opportunities for you to, places and times and platforms where you can show up.
I want to talk about you too. How did you launch into communications? What has taken you all around the world? Share with us your story.
Oh, Michelle, I was a child who grew up in love with books. Just in love with books and writing. And English literature was always my favorite subject at school. But I knew instinctively I didn't want to be a teacher. So I thought, well, maybe I'm a journalist. So I studied English literature at university. My first gig out of university was as a crime reporter on a daily newspaper in Johannesburg, a very, very tough gig. And then I moved into PR a couple of years later. And then my husband was working for a technology company in Johannesburg, and we had the opportunity to move to Germany to work at the head office. We were newlyweds. We couldn't speak a word of German. We were up for an adventure, so we did it. At that time, the corporate communications department at SAP, the company we were working for, was only German, and I couldn't speak a word of German. So I spent 3 years as a technical writer. Then I had a 10-year career break to raise our 3 children, during which time I wrote my first 2 novels. And I blogged the process of writing the novels. So that was the early 2000s, at a time when WordPress was nascent. It was the time of the mummy bloggers, and blogging was the technology. And when I was ready to go back to work full time, SAP was then looking for people who were comfortable with social media, who were able to help executives get onto social media. So that was my start of my entirely unplanned executive communications career. And by the time I left SAP, I was running the exec comms team globally and also running employee comms, which I loved as a combination, because exec comms is broad and employee comms goes deep. And it felt like a very satisfying combination of both functions.
I love that in the mommy blog era, and you're blogging about writing and you're writing novels while raising children, and then you become this huge executive based on all of this experience of doing it. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Entirely unplanned. I just I think it's a privilege to be able to kind of go with the flow that in the way that I did. And now I'm kind of passing that executive comms experience into the book and into my advisory work with clients. And I get so much satisfaction working one-to-one with clients.
And so what is next? Now that the book is out, you're on tour. What has that been like? What stages are you speaking on? Give us some behind the scenes.
Yeah, I've had June was the big month. I had a very exciting 2nd and 3rd of June where my book hit #1 on Amazon in 2 categories in the US and the UK. So that was a wonderful feeling. I then went to Vancouver to a communications conference, did a keynote there. And then I hosted my own book launch party in London, and then spent a lot of time visiting all the bookshops in London, looking to see if my book was on the shelves, because it's not something you can control as an author. And not even my publisher can control it. It's up to the individual booksellers which of the new books on the market they put on the shelves. But I found it in bookshops that I've loved for so long, like Foyles in Charing Cross Road and Blackwell's in Oxford and some of the big Waterstones in London. So I spent a few days visiting my book in bookshops and signing it and taking photographs. It was gorgeous. And now I'm, thanks to you, on a bit of a podcast tour. But one of the things I did as part of the marketing drive or the marketing initiative for my book was start my own podcast. And I've fallen in love. I love podcasting. It's so much
addictive,
fun.
Right?
It's totally addictive. So I've done an episode a week since late March.
And, let's talk about podcasts and leaders, how they can utilize podcasts, because I personally think that they should all be doing this, because it also gives their corporations a lot of marketing materials to use, other ways to repurpose it. Are you seeing more leaders using podcasts?
So on some levels I am, in that leaders who are household names either have their own podcasts or are going on other people's podcasts. The sort of next tier of leaders, I think, are, and I've seen some leaders. So there was an executive at SAP who ran her own podcast for a season under the SAP brand. I think some leaders are able to experiment and to try that out. One of the things leaders of a certain generation have to get over when it comes to podcasts is that you can't be scripted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's often that sort of fear of, in a media interview, you can have your talking points and you can be very cautious. In a blog or a keynote, very much scripted. But I think leaders have to get over that discomfort of, oops, I might say something, or something might come out, or I might get a difficult question, and just learn to show up as authentically as possible. Because I think, as you well know, it's an incredibly valuable and powerful platform.
Yeah, I agree, but yeah. I'm very biased. Anyone will tell you, if you're listening, I agree. I just think that there's so much value that when we're talking about leaders and putting themselves out there, that this is one of the best ways that they could be doing it.
Absolutely. And what I love about podcasts is that the content is evergreen. Because if somebody finds an episode of a podcast that they like, even if it was made 4 years ago, then they listen to all the back episodes, they become a follower, so I think out of all the materials that we're making at the moment, LinkedIn posts, blogs, TikTok videos, I honestly think podcasts have the greatest longevity.
I agree, but I love that. I hope that we will see more leaders sharing their stories, because I think that it's not only the unscripted part, but it's being able to hear them in their own voice, to really get to know them, because this is just a conversation where if, I met you at the coffee shop, this is what we would be talking about. These are the questions I would want to ask you. And so I think that's the beneficial part too of a leader just showing up and sharing of themselves. And it doesn't all have to be the work world. Let us know. You've already told us where you're from, that you're married, you have 3 children, all of this stuff in your journey. And I think leaders a lot just put up that wall of, I'm in my suit, I show up, I talk about my business, that is it, close the door. But there's so much more to people that if they allow that door to be opened, then we can, there is a tiny lizard in my living room that I just noticed out of the corner of my eye. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that. But he's crawling away. I might have to text my husband, and that never happened before. But for them to put down that wall to say, this is who I am, and there is another part of me that exists, and leaders need to show up and show that to us, I think, even more.
Absolutely. And I have two things to say to that. One, I'm interviewing a lot of leaders on my podcast. So either people who I interviewed in the book or other leaders, and we have fantastic conversations. So I'm incredibly grateful to those leaders who are prepared to show up in their full humanity. But also in this age of such bland content being produced by AI, such anodyne, boring, lowest common denominator content, this is a chance to show up in your full humanity. This is a chance to tell your stories. It's a chance to be a real human being. And I think we're hungry for that. I think the more AI content there is, the hungrier we are for real human interaction and real human stories. And I say the more digital we become, the more human we need to be, and I think this is incredibly important for leaders.
I love that. And you're so right. Yes, because we don't need more AI generated content. We need to hear from people and to connect on that level. Yes.
I'm bored, I just find it so dull. As an obsessive reader and an obsessive word person, I could find myself sort of nodding off to sleep.
Yeah, and it becomes obvious too. There was somebody posted something on Instagram the other day, and I got a text message right away going, well, you could see that was AI generated because that person doesn't even talk like that.
Yeah.
So it becomes obvious, we can tell, and it becomes boring. And I love that you mentioned that, because I think that stories are what connect us. It's what entertains us. It's what we crave. And so we just need more of them.
We do crave them. And my very dear friend, David Pullen, who wrote a wonderful book called The DNA of Engagement, and who was the MC at my book launch in London, he says stories are our oldest technology. And I just think that's brilliant. It's such a lovely way of thinking about it. It was the way, hundreds of years ago, we held our communities together. We didn't have any other tools except stories.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love talking to you, Charlotte. Where can everybody find you, find your book, and listen to your podcast?
Wonderful. So I'm on LinkedIn and I love connecting with people. My website is called charlotteotter.com. They can find a link to my Substack there. My Substack is called Speech Bubbles. My podcast is also on the website, but it's also on Apple and Spotify. It's also called Speech Bubbles. And I'd love people to come along and listen to hear what some very interesting leaders from diverse backgrounds, diverse identities, and underrepresented minorities are saying about leadership.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on, and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. It's been so much fun.
Well, I'm biased in thinking that podcasts are a perfect communication tool for leaders and for anyone who really has something to say, a story to tell, expertise to share. But I loved getting to hear that from Charlotte as well. I also loved hearing about the need to be authentic and show up. No more scripted stuff, no more AI. Be yourself, show up as a leader, as a human being, and it is what is going to connect people to you. Go grab her book. We Need New Leaders. I loved it. I learned so much from it. So I highly recommend it. And go follow Charlotte. Go listen to her podcast because she has some incredible interviews. And I know you'll just fall in love with her.